Welcome everybody. My name's Richard Dennis. I'm the director of the Australia Institute, and tonight I'm introducing myself, emceeing, giving the talk, and then getting the questions. So don't piss me off. Welcome. And there are a few unfamiliar faces here tonight, which is great. Usually I introduce the speaker, but to kick the year off, I'm giving the first talk of the year. So welcome to everybody who perhaps haven't been here before. Before I get underway, I'll just go through a little bit of housekeeping. So again, I'm Richard Dennis from the Australia Institute. We put on politics in the pub about once a month. Our next speaker, there's details on the other side. Our next speaker is Ian Fry, who some might remember spoke to us 2 years ago. In fact, was one of our first speakers at Politics in the Pub. And Ian is actually Tuvalu's climate change negotiator. So he was at Durban, and his talk on Wednesday the 14th of March is after Durban, is climate change on the back burner. So there's details of that floating around. There are some show bags at the door. If people are interested in the Australia Institute, please feel free to take one. Just some material about us and our recent research. I also have to give ourselves another little plug, doing it all tonight. We've just launched the Love Your Think Tank campaign on Valentine's Day yesterday. And if you would like to love your think tank, we're running a campaign to get 100 more regular donors to the Institute. We're talking a bit about money and power tonight. We don't have enough of either. Our credo is independent research needs independent funding. So if you are in a position to give us as little as $10 a month, that's cheaper than a cup of coffee, and lasts a lot longer than those roses that you got yesterday that are already starting to wilt. And there's a slip floating around, or of course you can do that through our website. So that's my Australia Institute business out of the way. There's also clipboards floating around. Again, for the unfamiliar faces, the only real way to know when we're doing these events is to give us your email address, and we'll let you know. So if you see a clipboard and you pop your email address on there, we will keep you posted. All right, so now Richard Dennis, here I am giving my talk. I want to talk tonight about why broadsheets have got such narrow interests. We hear a lot. We certainly heard a lot in the 2010 election about how banal a lot of the political debate has become, how trivial a lot of the media coverage has become. And while I share those conclusions and have made similar allegations, I think we need to think very carefully about why it is that this is the case. Gina Rinehart's recent interest in Fairfax has got more people thinking about the role of the media, rightly so. But as I said in a piece last week for the conversation, there's no evidence that Gina Rinehart is going to be a worse media proprietor than Rupert Murdoch, Kerry Packer or Conrad Black. I mean, we have to be very careful in creating some imaginary history of a media committed to democracy above all else, and wonder why in recent years standards have started to slip. I think things are changing, but I think we need to think very hard about what's changing in the media and to understand why those changes might be occurring, rather than just lament them and in turn create a fictional past, which I don't remember living through. And of course, what I'm also going to talk about tonight is the actual political debate, the debates engaged, the debates in which our elected representatives participate and of which the media report. We can only blame the media for so much if the politicians don't say anything interesting. It's not actually the media's job to make it seem interesting. But I think that there's a circularity between those two things, and I fear that we're spiralling downwards rather fast with the media bringing politics down and politics bringing the media down. But again, I don't think I've got all the answers, but I think that we as interested citizens need to do more than just lament what we see. We need to be able to explain it to ourselves and hopefully diagnose problems more successfully, so that we can devise solutions. Are you pointing at me, Serena?
No, volume. Can't hear you down there.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Thanks.
Oh, see, it was my fault. Okay, so to begin, so that's what I want to do. I want to talk about that. I'm going to talk about that for another 25 minutes or so, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and some beer afterwards. My premise is that the Australian public is interested in a much wider range of issues than the issues that we read about in our newspapers, that we see on television at night, and that our politicians debate in Parliament. I don't know if that's a contentious proposition or not. I'm certainly aware of an enormous amount of survey and other evidence that suggests most people think that health, education, transport, aged care and environment are very, very, very important issues. And we have data going back 30 years that show these issues have always been at the top. We also see survey after survey that shows that people, depending on how the question is framed, strongly support or overwhelmingly support the idea that they would like to see better quality services, and they are willing to pay for them, and the variability in the results really hinges on how the question's framed. If people believe that everyone would pay their fair share, people overwhelmingly want to see more money spent on health, education, transport and aged care. If people suspect that they're the only ones that will pay and the rich will get off and the bludgers will get it all, still around half of the population is actually supportive of greater expenditure in the services that matter most. So my premise, which you can reject if you want, is that in general Australians are interested in bigger picture policy issues, and they're willing to spend their money, our money collectively, on buying better services. And overwhelmingly Australians respond negatively to survey questions around things like, do you wish we paid lower taxes and looked more like America? It's a trivially small percentage of Australians who see that as their desired goal. But an overwhelming percentage of political and policy debate in Australia in the last 20 years has really revolved around how we should best reduce expenditure in these areas so that we can achieve the holy grail of lower taxes, and how, if at all, we should privatise or deregulate a wide range of services so that our systems would look more like the Americans than the Northern Europeans. So there's clearly a disconnect between what people say they want and what our political class has decided people really want, and I'll get to about what we might mean by really want, or just that they're willing to push their own barrow despite rather than because of that public attitude. I want to start also my other premise, which you might reject as well, and this one's more arguable, but I think it's important. I think Australians are far more progressive than all of our major political parties think, and certainly far more progressive than our newspapers believe. And I'm writing about this at the moment, so I'm sort of trying these arguments out for the first time, so get your eggs ready. As I said, I think Australians are more progressive than we give them credit for, and I think a lot of people on the left have fallen for the idea that the average Australian isn't very progressive and is obsessed with their hip pocket. So I'm just going to present some scant evidence, but I'll build on it later, especially in questions when you attack me for it, that Australians are more progressive. If Australians weren't progressive, if Australians didn't care about fairness, if Australians weren't interested in equity, why did John Howard introduce the Fair Work Act? Why didn't he call it the Efficient Work Act? Why didn't he call it the Productive Work Act? What's the point in dressing it up in the language of fairness? Why pretend that a policy in industrial relations change was fair? Why would a conservative government introducing radical industrial relations reform bother to pretend that it was about fairness? Similarly, why would the mining industry bother to spend tens of millions of its shareholders' dollars, tens of millions of dollars, telling us about how what's good for the mining industry is good for disadvantaged people. Indeed, if you've gone to the movies recently, you'll know that the real motivation for running a mining company is to create jobs for refugees. You must have seen the ads. You know, these executives wake up and think, what would be the best way to help refugees and Indigenous people and unemployed people? I know, I'll accidentally make tens of billions of dollars running a mine. And I'll frame that up in terms of, look, I created a job for Barry over here. That's what really gets me out of bed in the morning. Why don't the mining executives, if Australians don't care about equity, why do mining industry executives bother to talk about all the impacts they have on the community? Why 95, 98% of Australians don't work in the mining industry? So everyone watching the ad knows they're not working in the mining industry. Everyone watching the ad knows their friends aren't working in the mining industry. What's the purpose of the ad? The ad says, I'm sure I might be making a lot of money, but don't talk about that. Look, I'm helping disadvantaged people. So clearly their marketing and their understanding of the electorate is there's no way anyone's going to say yes to an enormous mine if all it does is make a rich person rich. There's no way that you're going to win a public debate about getting industrial relations changes through if all it's going to do is make employers more powerful and exploit low-paid workers more effectively. The reason that they bother to frame things up in the language of fairness and equity and sustainability, I'm arguing, it's part of my argument tonight, but again, attack me at the end, is that the middle Australian is worried about these things. And, you know, arguably the right are better at playing to people's selflessness, better at playing to our perception of the kind of country we want to create. I think they're better at doing that than the people running around saying they want to do progressive nation-building stuff. So they're my two premises. So my two premises that we are more progressive than we think, and that conservatives actually know this perhaps better than we do. So why the narrow view? Why the narrow perspective? Why don't we talk enough about the fact that Australia is one of the lowest tax countries in the world, certainly advanced countries? Why doesn't the Sydney Morning Herald tomorrow explain that if Australia had the OECD average rate of tax, that we'd have tens of billions of dollars extra to spend, we wouldn't get all worried about a deficit, and we could introduce disability insurance like that? Why doesn't a broadsheet newspaper state the obvious, that were Australia's tax system to look like the OECD average, we could afford to do anything you can think of? Is that not newsworthy? Would no one buy the paper? Would everybody laugh at them for suggesting that Australia could be anything other than one of the lowest tax countries in the world? What is it about that suggestion that's so unnewsworthy? I'll come back to my answer in a minute. Why do we spend enormous amounts of political time talking about asylum seekers, a very small number of asylum seekers, and we virtually never debate the actual level of population growth in Australia and the fact that our population grows by around 1 million people every 4 years? Why do major political parties spend so much time talking about a minor issue like a couple of thousand asylum seekers, and both of them virtually ignore what is a major issue? Whose job is it to build the infrastructure for 1 million extra people every 4 years? And we don't have to agree whether that's good or bad. Whether, you know, we don't all have to agree whether 1 million people every 4 years is desirable or not. But if that's what you're doing, you're going to put pressure on your health system. Who's going to build the hospitals for the 1 million extra people? Who's going to build the transport system? These are huge economic and social questions which, when you compare the amount of time spent talking about whether Nauru is the less worst option than Malaysia, to the attention spent on, all right, where will Sydney's next 1 million people live? Who will build the transport? When will it be installed? And will the trains be running before they arrive or 10 years after? They seem like important questions. The same is true for Melbourne, the same is true